All right, so thanks guys for being here. I'm very excited about this talk personally, selfishly even.
Selfishly, yes.
To see what Bob has to say. The jobs to be done theory is one of the biggest theories of innovation, as I'm sure most of you guys know here. Clay Christensen from Harvard Business School, the famous professor, the biggest name, as a lot of people are going to say, of innovation, has made that a theory and worked with Bob here, who was the founder of the methodology. So they worked together for many years.
Almost 30.
Almost 30 years, to come up with this methodology we're going to hear very soon about, in order to help with growth and how to understand the customers. So very excited, we're looking forward, and it's a lot of practical tips, so keep notes. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I love the fact it's a small group, so you can ask questions along the way. It's very simple. Just raise your hand if you've got something or you've got a comment, please do it. We're going to go pretty fast. If I go too fast, just tell me to slow down by do this. Okay? A little bit background. So I'm going to do a quick intro about myself. I'm going to talk about the foundations of jobs to be done, like what's the basic terminology, where did it come from, a little bit of that. And then we're going to jump into some case studies where I have 3 case studies. I added a first one that's in the CPG industry, and then I move it to software to show you how it applies in software. And then we're going to wrap it up and kind of give you some pointers and tips of things you should do as you start to think about innovating in your space, or where do opportunities lie. Okay? A little bit about me. I'm an engineer. My mom would tell you I was an engineer out of the womb. I was making things by the time I was 2. I was fixing things by the time I was 5 to get out of trouble. I built my first product at 8. Well, that's not really true, but I had 3 close head brain injuries before I was 7 years old. So I can't read and I can't write. And I consider it the greatest gift I ever got, because the way I have to learn is I have to ask questions. So I can't learn through books anymore, so I have to actually figure out how to ask the questions. So all those questions you guys kind of hold, the kind of like, I can't ask that question, I ask those questions, right? So, and that's really kind of one of the foundations of this methodology, is to realize that I am really stupid about why customers want what they want, and I can't actually figure it out, and every time I think I know, I'm wrong. I have to actually go talk to them, right? I've worked on over 3,500 products. I've done 10 startups. Ranging from things like Basecamp. I don't know if you know who Basecamp is. They're based in Chicago. They do project collaboration. I worked on QuickBooks. I worked on MailChimp. I worked on the guidance system for the Patriot missile. I've worked on Pokemon mac and cheese, just about everything in between, right? And somebody asked me the other day, like, how were you able to work on all those different things? It turns out that my ability to ask questions and frame things is so applicable to all these different places that it's actually really, really powerful. And so it's the fundamental thing that I do. And so what I'd like to do is just share with you how I see the world and how I've used it to help people grow their businesses, right? So foundations. So Alki talked about Clay. Clay is the father of disruption theory. The whole notion of how do small Davids drop big Goliaths. And that was his study. That's what he studied at Harvard for basically almost 30 years. He's written probably 20 books on how to basically disrupt industries, right? And I met Clay in 1993. I just walked into his office. He had a sign outside of his office called Anomalies Wanted. And I walked in the door and said, I'm here. And that was the beginning of a friendship that lasted for almost 30 years. He gave me 4 hours a quarter for 27 years with no agenda. And so we would just sit down and think, and he'd tell me what he was working on. I would tell him what I was working on. I would push him, he would push me. We'd just go back and forth. He's one of my best friends. He passed in 2020. But he said a statement that kind of set me down really is that questions create space in the brain for solutions to fall into. Think about that for a second. Questions create spaces in the brain for solutions. So if you don't ask a question, there's nowhere for the information to go. And so for me, the reason why that was so hard-hitting is that I realized the fact that what question does somebody ask themselves to say, today's the day I need InterSystems? What's that question? What's the space that they have to hold to actually do that? How big is the problem they have to have, right? And so all of the work that I did really started kind of from this whole notion of trying to find how to create the spaces for solutions to fall into. The other thing I would tell you is a very foundational piece, and you'll see this all the time, but like The struggling moment is the seed for all innovation. Wherever your customers are struggling is where you need to be building the next set of features or products, right? Most of the time we try to get to wow them and we try to think we can inspire them to buy a product, but I will tell you in all the products I've worked in over the last 40 years, it's almost like a 10-to-1 ratio. If they have 1 unit of inspiration, it's like one unit of I'll say problem is equal to 10 units of inspiration. And so a lot of people say they'll buy by inspiring, but most of it has to be always connected back to some problem or some struggling moment they have. And so, for example, I'll look at a technology, and all of a sudden I'll say, well, what progress can it help people make? What struggling moments can it go after? As opposed to just like, oh, we can do all these different things. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So the basic premise is this, is that people don't buy products, they hire them to make progress in their life, right? And so the way we look at this is that if this is the old way of doing something and this is the new way of doing something, and all of a sudden they get to a struggling circumstance, if we are creatures of habit, we really don't want to change, right? And so the fact is to actually make change, you have to realize there's some elements to it. One is there has to be a struggling moment and some push that they cannot continue with the old way of doing things, right? But if they have no idea what's on the other side, over here, this is where people bitch, but they don't switch, right? They just complain and complain and complain and complain. But the moment you give them an idea, click, one more time. Hold on, I might have ran out of battery. Oh, there we go. The moment you give them an idea, it pulls them to the other side. But here's the other thing is, if this is a river and I'm trying to get across the river, how many different ways can I get across that river? How many different solutions could there possibly be to get across that river? Hundreds, right? Get a boat, teach them to swim, dig a tunnel, build a bridge, get a helicopter, get a plane. Like there's a whole bunch of things. But all of the solution that fits is dependent on the circumstance they're in. How fast do they need to get out of here? What's actually chasing them? What's happening to it? And what do you think is on the other side? So value is determined by their context and their outcomes, not by our product. Our product fills the value, but the fact is the value itself is created by this notion of progress they're trying to make that they can't make right now, right? And so ultimately it's looking at these different ways of basically going across that. And so there's 4 frameworks that I just want to I'm going to hit them across the top just so you get the basic of them. But there's a certain way of thinking about the customer that's really, really important. First one is what I call supply side versus demand side. So I'm an engineer. I have an electrical engineering undergrad. I studied mechanical and chemical, and then I went off to Stanford and did some design school work. But ultimately, the fact is I was told the greatest lie ever. And I think it's probably because I think they teach all engineers this, but it's like they use the phrase, build it and they will come. It's a lie. It's just a freaking lie, guys, right? And the fact is I would tell you I learned that very early on where I built things and nobody came. And then I'd ask them what they wanted, I'd make it, and they say, oh, that's not what I meant. And you started to realize interacting with customers is really hard because half the time they don't know what they want, they don't know what the solution is, and they only can describe kind of what they don't want. And so part of this is to realize that there's actually 2 sides of the world. There's the supply side of the world, which is where we build a product and push it to the market. But there's this demand side of the world where they actually have a problem and they pull things into the market, into their lives, right? And so ultimately, and what I always say, there's this wall in between, which I call product market fit, which is this wall that's 10 feet thick and 100 feet high of how we actually try to map the demand side and the supply side together. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll know kind of the business system, the product, we'll think about the features and benefits, but what we do is we typically climb up on top of the wall and look down onto the market, right? And so what we see markets and segments and personas and all this abstract stuff, but it doesn't tell me why people buy. And so what happens is to really understand that you got to hop over that wall and go down to the very, very bottom floor and understand the causation of what happens. Because again, nobody randomly buys your product, but yet we treat it like that. I had 100 leads, 100 leads get me into 50 conversations, 50 conversations gets me to 22 proposals, 22 proposals. that's not how, to me, the world works. What causes one sale? What's the underlying dominoes that have to happen in their lives to make them ready to buy you, right? And so what you do is when you jump over this wall and you go down to this level, you start to realize there's a certain mechanism. One is they have to have a current, they must be doing something. Doing nothing is actually doing something, right? But ultimately, there's a struggling moment. There's a context that is imposed upon them that causes them to rethink what they're doing, which causes the struggling moment. Once they acknowledge the struggling moment, they actually figure out, well, what do we really want out of this thing? And then they look for candidates to actually help. And no candidate is perfect, so they actually have to look at what are they hiring for, what are the firing criteria, and ultimately they have to make trade-offs. There's no perfect solution for anybody. Everybody has to make trade-offs on every purchase they make in their entire life, whether it's InterSystems or basically a Snickers bar. There's trade-offs, and you got to become aware of them. And so partially the thing is as consumers, what they do is they climb up this wall and they just look over and see brands and products. They have no idea how some of that stuff works. They don't care. But ultimately, the way to see where people make the change and where new products need to be targeted is to the demand side. And so for me, what happens is I start over here on the demand side and realize what I need to build, and then I use that to create the requirements for somebody else. So one of the companies I worked for was Intuit. And they found in 2001, they found people basically using Quicken, which was their best product at the time, for running their small business. And they're like, why in the world would somebody be using a personal finance tool to run the accounting of their business? That just doesn't make any sense. And so they built two teams. I was on one team, which was, let's go talk to small business owners and understand what causes them to say today's the day they need to get an accounting system. And the other group was a group of accountants who basically wanted to build the best accounting system for small businesses. So they were literally like, I'm the expert, I'm going to tell you exactly what to go build, right? And in this, what we started to realize is that what the accountants wanted was something that was so detailed and the language was so deep that what happened to me is a small business owner had to almost become an accountant, right? And so what we ended up doing is scrapping that entire part of the project, and we actually focused on what causes somebody to say today's the day they need a new accounting system. Well, it turns out there's only two reasons. One is I can't get paid. I had been doing invoice with Microsoft Word, and then I turned it in and it got lost, and I don't know where it is, and I didn't know how to look at it, and so ultimately I have an invoicing problem. And the second one is I have a hard time paying contractors. And so that's all they advertised on, right? And so what happens is people started to use it, but the big key is they never wanted to hire somebody to do accounting. They wanted to hire another painter, another baker, somebody else to help them in the shop. The last thing they want to do is hire a professional to help them with their accounting. And so it had to be easy enough to do themselves. But once they started to use it, they all of a sudden had problems. Hey, payroll. Hey, how about a business loan? Hey, how about this? Next thing you know, it's a $9 billion business, QuickBooks. And so part of this is to realize like their whole strategy is not to come up with a bunch of features they can add, but they literally study small businesses over and over and over again to figure out where that next feature needs to go. And so recently, does anybody know who they bought? So way outside your league. They bought MailChimp. So why would Intuit buy MailChimp? That's right. So all of a sudden, now they have all this help in the accounting side, and now all of a sudden they started to have all this help, and they specialize in the small business markets, which are already in. Why not actually go do that? And so they're now moving verticals, and they're going to end up piecing together a complete ERP, right? But the notion is nobody, they have the largest market share of any accounting package, in the 13% of market share, and the fact is that they have the market share that no accounting system wants. Right? All the accounting systems, they want the people up here, but they went after the people down there, right? What we call the underserved. So again, the struggling moment is the key. If we can understand what they're struggling with, it actually makes it easier for people to buy, right? And now, this is not a new idea. It's been around. Ted Levitt said in 1960, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill. They want a 1/4-inch hole, right? And so how do we actually apply that thinking as we go? And so one of the things, at 18 years old, I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. Deming. Does anybody know who Dr. Deming is? Who was Dr. Deming?
He was one of the fathers, one of the early pioneers of statistical process
control. That's right. And he was the one, if you know the Toyota production system method. He's the one who came up with all that. If you know Lean or Six Sigma and you know Agile, all of those things root back to what Deming was doing. And I met him, I was 18 years old, he was 85, and I asked him 52 questions in 22 minutes, and he called me the most curious kid he ever knew, and he asked me if I'd be his intern for the summer, and I said yes. And he took me to Japan. And so what he taught me when I went to Japan was something called the 5 whys. Again, we know that. Why do I want to drill? I want a hole. Why do I want a hole? I want a plug. Why do I want a plug? I want a lamp. Why do I want a lamp? I want to read better. Perfect. I'm going to go work on the Kindle. And so you start to realize that the problem that sometimes we're so myopic on the problem, we can't actually see what we should be working on. And ultimately, we have to be able to get to the right level to understand how to figure that out, right? So I want to teach you how to do that. So one of the key frameworks really, really at the front lines is that nobody buys randomly. I've said that several times, but the fact is we talk about that there are forces at play that cause people to buy your product. Something has to happen to them to prepare them to see you, because the reality is their head is full and they don't have any space to see you unless I have a problem. That question creates the space, right? And so what we start to realize is there's 4 forces. One is, as they start to move from the old way to the new way, the first thing is there has to be a push of the situation. If there's no push, if there's no way of people to see what's going on, they're not even going to see you. So they have to have some void in their life of something's not good enough, something not fast enough, something's not, it's breaking, right? Something has to happen, right? Then the other thing, though, is that I can have this, but if I don't have anything to see, this is where I just complain a lot. But ultimately, the fact is the moment you show them an idea, all of a sudden there's a pull. And it takes push and pull to enable people to change, right? And this is not new. We could say pain and gain, but I consider this the fuel of how people decide to buy something new, right? But this is where it goes different, is that though there's forces in one direction, there's forces in the other direction. And what you start to realize is the moment that they start to see the new idea, they actually start to get anxiety. What about this? What about my data? Is it secure? Is it this? Is it that? And so you start to realize there's a lot of actually anxiety that comes up. And then there's stuff they have to actually get rid of. Well, what do I do? I have a contract for the next 12 months on this thing. I don't know how to get rid of it. And so you start to realize there's fuel to make the change, and then there's friction to get rid of the change, or to basically hinder the change, right? So one of the things I did is I built houses in Detroit. I built 1,000 homes in 4 years, mostly in the, I'll say, from the $110,000 to $250,000 price range, right? Divorced family with kids, downsizers, and first-time home buyers, right? So think of parents. What would cause your parents to say today's the day they need to sell the house you grew up in? What would push them? I'm sorry? Maintenance. You know what? I've been taking care of the house for 25 years. It's now like I either can hire somebody, but I really don't want a yard anymore. It's a good one. What else? Yeah, all of a sudden it's like we're going up and down the stairs a little bit more work than we want to. We'd love to have a first floor master, but it's like the knees start to hurt. What else? What? Cleaning. Keeping the house clean and basically keeping it up. It's a big house. It's usually got 4 bedrooms or more in it, and people are like, I don't use them anymore. I don't need them anymore. You got other things like the kids moving to a different place, and now the grandkids are somewhere else. So here's the first part is, there's never one cause. Deming talks about root causes, and roots is there's lots of them, but they're patterns. And you start to see the patterns of this and this and this have to be true for them to even look at a house. So this is part of it, that the pushes open the brain to help you see. The moment they see my condo, 1,654 square feet, 2 bedroom, 2.5 bath, first floor laundry, gourmet kitchen, you'd love it. Absolutely love it. And so all of a sudden they have a pull. The pull is, God, we don't have to upgrade the kitchen. Oh my God, the house needs a new roof. I don't have to do the roof. And you start to realize that, and I don't have to do the maintenance now. So there's some pull to it. But all of a sudden, anxiety, what's some of the anxieties that come into your parents' head as you're trying to move, as they're trying to think about moving? You're shaking your head because you're living this right now, aren't you? Oh my God, the whole thing of the basement, right? I haven't been in the basement in 10 years, and now I got to go see it. It's like, oh my God, what do I do with all this stuff? I don't want to throw it out, and they remember everything, and it's like, so what happened is I got a bunch of cancellations. People would come, and they'd sign up, and they'd be so excited for the house, and 2 or 3 weeks later, they'd come back, and they'd say 2 boxes of Kleenex. They've cleaned out three closets, and they're like, we can never do this. We've got 18 closets. We're not going to be able to move, right? And so, in most cases, is that my problem? It is, because they're not going to buy the house, right? So how do I fix it, right? And so part of this is to realize that as I looked at this, so I want to increase the pulls or I want to decrease the anxiety. So what happens is in business school, what I was taught was add more features and they'll buy. That's wrong. More features add what? Complexity and confusion. Can it really do all those things? I don't know. Do I need all those things? I don't need all those things. And so they start negotiating. When you overload a product with too many features, they try to negotiate you down because there's half the features they don't want. And if you didn't tell them they were there, they would never negotiate them out. Right? So one of the things I did is I actually raised the price of my condo and included moving and 2 years of storage and a place to sort all the crap. What do you think that did to my sales? Almost 30% increase in sales, which was a lot, right? My competitor across the street thought I was crazy because they offer free granite, they offer hardwood floors, they offer all these different things, but the fact is what they really need is a way to help me pack my shit up and move, right? And so part of this is to realize, like, I'm a builder, but through this process I realized I'm not a builder, I'm a mover. My job is to help you move from one house to the next. And the other part I realized is that they had anxiety about the fact that their home needed work. So I was a builder, I had a bunch of crews, I could actually go fix their houses. So I actually sold 1,000 new homes and I sold 500 used homes after I actually got them to move in, and I would fix up their house and split the profits, right? So part of this is to realize if you understand how people are trying to make progress, you can actually come up from a whole different set of perspectives. So one of the other things I did, and I'll tell that in the next one. So ultimately, we're trying to look at that's fast. Okay, I gotta hurry up. So the next framework is really the timeline. When people start to buy something new, anything, the first thing they have to do is they have to have a first thought. The first thought is usually where a question creates a space in the brain for something to fall into, right? And then they come back and say, should I do this, or is this really a problem? And so they go into what we call passive looking mode. So it's kind of like when your car lease is up and you kind of finally realize, oh God, I gotta get a new car in a couple months. The next day you recognize every single car on the road, but the day before you didn't see one of them, right? So it's that notion of being able to see things because now you've got a space in your brain. And then you start to act, then what happens is there's some big event that basically causes you to go into active looking. Active looking is this notion of almost the kid in the candy store. Tell me everything you can do. I want to know all of it, right? I hate this point because they're trying to actually figure out all the things they need, and what they end up doing is comparing you to somebody else to actually figure out what they need when they realize they still don't know what they really need, right? And so ultimately there's this event too where they actually, where they have to decide. And deciding is actually about trade-offs, right? And so ultimately, how do we actually help them with the trade-offs they have to make? Because no solution is perfect. So the way I think about this is, first thought is making space. Passive looking is about actually learning how to do it, whether it's a problem or not. Active looking is seeing all the possibilities. And 4 is about deciding what we don't need. 63% of all proposals in the B2B space go unanswered. I believe it's because they don't have choice. They compare this to something else. If you actually come back and let me give you 3 different ways in which to figure this out, they actually can make a decision. So Dan Aurelia, does anybody know who Dan Aurelia is? He's a behavior scientist, and what he realized is that if you give people 3 things, they can almost make a decision 93% of the time. But if you give them 1 thing, they can only make a decision 40% of the time. And why is that? Because when you give somebody 3 things, what's the first thing you do when you're proposed 3 things? What's the first thing you do? you eliminate one. You look at the 3 and go, yeah, this is the least likely one I'm going to do. But all of a sudden you have confidence in the one that you don't want. And when you look at the 2 that are left, the logical thing would say they compare them to each other, but they don't. They compare each one of them to the one that was out. And so in the end, they might have eliminated B, right? And then they look at A versus B and C versus B, and they'll eliminate C, and then they'll say, oh yeah, I want A. But they really didn't pick A. They eliminated B and C. And so knowing how people make those decisions is really, really important in terms of talking about marketing, sales, and product. So I'm just going to move ahead because I'm a little low on time. Case studies. This is a quick one, and then I'll give you 2 deeper ones. Snickers and Milky Way. I had the luck and the joy to work on Snickers in 1994, right? It's crazy. Would you say that Snickers and Milky Way compete with each other? Are they competition? You say no, and others say yes. Here's the difference. On the supply side, they do compete. They're actually made on the same line. They actually have the same ingredients. They go right next to each other on the shelf, right? And so from that part, it's seen as, oh, it's a candy bar, right? But when you talk to consumers, it's completely different. So when you talk to people about Snickers, typically it's like, I missed the last meal, my stomach is growling, I've got a lot of work to do, I can't stop to eat. Give me something that I can eat really fast that's going to give me the energy but not spoil the next meal, right? Milky Way, on the other hand, typically happens after an emotional experience, good or bad, eaten alone, usually to basically give them a sense of satisfaction, like a sense of peace and a sense of getting back to normal, right? And so you start to realize that Snickers competes with a Big Mac, a coffee, an apple, a protein bar, where Milky Way competes with ice cream, brownies, wine, and I actually did an interview with somebody who said, yeah, I was going to go for a run because I had just a horrible day, and then I sat down and ate a Milky Way, which you can see happening. Ice cream's the same way, right? And so part of this is to realize that one of the things that came out of this was it had to be food-like. So in the insight, we realized that when you take the first bite of a Snickers, hard or soft, it's hard, right? So it actually bites down like food. And when you masticate it, it turns into a ball. And then actually you swallow it and it goes into your stomach. It's actually designed that way to absorb the acid in your stomach because it's actually growling, right? Milky Way, first bite, hard or soft? Soft, ooh, it's very soft. It melts in your mouth. 2, 3 chews, it's liquid. You're drinking that stuff down. And you're taking a bite and you're literally setting it down. You're not eating that thing fast. And so you start to realize all those different. So one of the things I did is I was responsible in the chemistry side to change the layering and change the mastication in it. And then we took this insight and we gave it to marketing. At the time, the reason why we got involved is they were about $380 million in sales, and they were flat for the last 4 years. And they basically said, we just need to find a different approach. And so out of that, we've changed those things, and advertising made this ad. That's, by the way, you're not you when you're hungry came from them. Hangry came from them. Those are the words they used to describe their situation. We didn't have to do any creative around that. They actually gave us the creative to go do that. This went from basically about 300 million to almost 3 billion in the next 10 years. Because all it did was position it against is like that food, the food gap in your life. This is the fastest, easiest thing. And even the craziest thing is one of the biggest people who will eat this is long distance runners. Why? Because it gives them like you can say it's not healthy, but the reality is for them it's good enough because of all the calories they're burning. Questions or comments on that one? Let me give you another one. Intercom. This is Des Traynor. He's one of the founders. They started in 2010, and he had done 2 startups beforehand. I've known him since about 2006. And every time he built a startup to basically go sell it, he'd buy all these pieces of things, and then when he had to sell it, he had to put it all back together. And so he'd have to buy he'd have a customer database, he'd have live chat. None of it was integrated back in the day, 2010-ish, right? And the other thing is the only people who were integrated were the big guys. He's like, how do I help small startups do this in a regular way, right? And so he basically came up with the word intercom and basically started to build a bunch of tools, basically all connected, but came off of one database, right? Took him about 2 years to build it. By 2012, this was his initial proposition was the fact is have your data in one place, cradle to grave for your customer. To be honest, they launched in 2012. They got 3.5 million in sales. Year 2, they got about 5 million in sales, but it was kind of it wasn't taking off, it was kind of slowing down, and they're like, okay, what's going on? So Des calls me and says, can we talk to a couple customers? By the way, you don't need a lot of customers here because this is very fundamental research. We did this with 10 interviews. That's it. And so we sat down and we talked to people who recently bought Intercom. Said, what in the world is going on in your business to make you ready to buy Intercom, and what are you hoping for when we put Intercom in? And so as we go out and kind of talk to these people, we found a pattern of 4 really different things of why people were using it. We had some people who were buying it would say, that I'm using it to acquire. And it typically was marketing, and it would be like where people are coming to the website, but they're not converting. So we use Intercom as a way to actually help us do conversions. Okay. Talk to another group, people say, no, we have many signups. We don't have that problem. We're missing engagement. We need people to come back. We need to actually help them when they're stuck. We need to actually have some way in the app to actually interact with them, and we use Intercom to do that. Turns out there's some product people who would buy it to learn that we need to know where people are struggling so we can actually see where it is, and so we buy it for this, for basically to learn. And then there's this anomaly here, which is these people would call it and say, yeah, we use it as our support ticket mechanism. And we're like, wait, what? Why would you do it? Because we didn't build any of that out yet. And so you start to realize that there were these 4 different things, and it turns out that this competes with HubSpot at the time, and that competes with Zendesk at the time. Right? And so the first thing they realized is that anyone who bought any one of their reasons, they would buy it for, let's say, acquire, and they'd never use it for any of the others. Because though they had access to all of it, marketing would buy it and say, hey, I have this tool, and they'd go to tech support or basically to customer success, and they say, I don't need a free tool. And so all of a sudden they realized they didn't have one product, but they had 4 products. Right? The other part is they realized that most of the people who were looking for a solution here did not actually know what anything was called because they were startups and they didn't know the language. And so they started to switch, and they switched by actually buying keywords in all the struggling moments that people had. Happened to be 60% less on pay-per-click because most people will buy the features and benefit piece, but they don't buy the struggling moment piece. And you start to realize that they could actually get more traffic that way. But they start about the problem to make sure that, do you have this problem? Is this what's going on in your life? And then what they do is they talk about, here's the outcomes we can help get. Is this something you want? And then they would click in and see the product. Right? So we did this at the end of 2013, beginning of 14. By Q2 of 14, they had basically started to say, hey, we got these packages. And it started to take off. And ultimately, by the end of 2014, they said, no, we have 4 products. Right? And so when they thought they had one product, it actually turned out to be 4 products. Now, to build those products, they just took the basic system and then they turned features off. So it only did the thing for acquire, did only the thing for engage. And so they didn't have to really build 4 products. It's the same platform. It just has different features that are focused on what you're trying to do. The other thing they did is they started to say, oh, well, we're going to acquire, this costs this much. And engage costs that much because at some point in time they were comparing them to other products, and so we just marketed as 80% or 20% cheaper than HubSpot or Zendesk. And so all of a sudden, instead of being one price for all of it, it was 4 different things, and we actually got a chance to sell to everybody else. So what happened was from March 2014 to basically September 15, they grew 5x in customers. And they grew another 3x on top of that in revenue. They went from 5 million to 75 million in 18 months. So that allowed them to go raise their Series A. Series A, they went off and basically started to get better and better in understanding and be intimate about customers' jobs to be done, right? They actually wrote a book about it somewhere up there. I think that's that one up there. And ultimately, by 2008, did their Series B. They hired a traditional marketer who came in and changed it back to chat, onboarding, retention, customer support, the intercom platform, and sales went down. So by 2009, they basically went back to the three core things that they wanted to do, and out of that, they were able to get their next round of funding and be about 1.25 million. The thing that I would tell you is I still work with them today, almost 15 years later, and the reality is the way they have one, if you look at their AI component, they are the only people I know who are doing it very, very well because they're not to impress anybody with AI. They're just using AI to solve customer struggling moments at the very low end, and so that they don't have to do it. And so they have a very specific equation of how they're actually deciding what to develop for AI, and so they're not over-promising and they're making it easier for people to use it. All right? Questions or comments on that one? All right, last one. I got time still, right? This is a company called Autobooks. They're fintech. They're based in Detroit. Steve Robert is the CEO. He's done 2 previous startups as well. But this company basically adds functionality to banks, so they can do what Square and PayPal do, but at my local bank, right? So how do I accept a payment? How do I send an invoice? All of a sudden I can now, so like they have tap to pay where it goes directly into your account. So you can take your iPhone and be a plumber and say, I'm doing a job here, just pay this way. They tap to pay to you, and it literally goes into your account and you have access to the money. So one of the things most people don't know is when you have PayPal, Square, even QuickBooks, they keep that money for anywhere from 4 to 7 to 10 days, which is the float, right? But this way they can have access right away. And the banks actually trust it enough that they'll start to loan against it. And so they've started to build this out. And so there's 2 aspects to this. One is the small business side, and the other is the bank side, right? And so Chris Speck, who is a co-founder of Rewired, which is the company I'm with now, he didn't want to consult anymore. He wanted to basically go back and build product. He had a set of twins and had his 3rd kid and was like, I can't travel all over. I'm like, perfect. So he went off and handled the small business side and did all the product side. But he left me with the bank side of how to help sell banks. And so I took Kyle Bazzi and Derek Sutton kind of under my wing and basically worked with them for about 6 months to talk to banks ask banks, like, why in the world are you signing up for Autobooks? Like, what in the world's happening that says that today's the day? And so the first thing is I had to start to get them to think away from product and feature and benefits to progress. And so ultimately the fact is Kyle had a whole list of all the features and benefits, and he had a demo set up where he would show up and he'd literally tell everybody, like, here's all the things we can do, here's everything that's going on, which one do you want, right? And I said, no, we need to change that. We got to talk about their progress. What are their struggling moments and their trade-offs before we even talk about the product? And they're like, well, people will never say that. I'm like, okay, let's try. And so the ultimate thing is I want to switch the conversation from here's what the product is and here's who it works for to tell me about who, when, where, and why they have this problem, and then I'll tell you about how this product solves it, right? And so ultimately, the thing that Kyle realized is the sales process, is it a customer-focused process? It sounds like it is, but it turns out it's really a supply-side idea. Where people are in the funnel, it's how we want to sell, it's how we manage, it's how the process we have to sell. But what you start to realize is the way people buy and the way we sell are actually really, really different. And so what we end up doing is recalibrating their sales funnel to say, where is the prospect in the timeline? Are they in passive looking? Are they actually in active looking? Are they in deciding? And ultimately, as a salesperson, your job is to help them move through the buying timeline, not through our sales funnel. And the interesting part is when he went to this exercise to say, what are the things pushing them to buy? What are the outcomes they're really seeking for? If the salesperson couldn't figure those things out, they were not a lead yet. So they went from having like, each sales rep had 128 leads, and they went to 28 leads, because they had real people who were actually had ideas of how to move, right? So I asked Kyle, what are you struggling with most? What's the thing that's just like driving you crazy? And he goes, you know what? It's the demo. It's just driving me out of my mind. Every 90 days, he goes, we have a process, we actually do advertising, we let people in, we do all these webinars. Ultimately, we book a demo, and the demo is like at some point is where we want to close, right? And that will happen is we'll look at it after 90 days, and people say, oh, this didn't work and that worked, and we should do this and we should change it, and they change it in 90 days, and then they try it again, and it's just trial and error. I said, well, let's think about this for a second. When you give a demo, where do you assume most people are? He said, well, they're in deciding. I said, are they? When you're at a trade show and they know nothing about you and they don't even know they have the problem, are they really still at deciding? It's like, no. I said, well, let's think about this. If they're up here, what's the demo look like if they're actually in first thought and passive looking? It's typically a small group, 1 or 2 people. You're having a conversation about the problem. They're trying to see if it's big enough for them to solve. They haven't really decided whether it is or not. Versus active looking, if I have a demo here, they want to see everything. Tell me everything you got. Tell me everything you want to have. Tell me why, like what is everything? And then ultimately deciding is, it's all about, does it fit? Does it have the tech stack? Does it have the security issues? It's like check the box type of stuff. So I said, the reality is you actually have 3 different demos, not one. And the reason why you keep changing it, you're trying to create one demo that will work under all situations. But if you actually reframe it and say, ask them where they are in their buying timeline, it changes their entire thing. So all of a sudden what happened is this one turned out to be an hour demo with 90% of the time talking to them about why we're here. Giving them one example, but then them having to beg to get the second demo. And the second demo had to be not only the people in the room, but it had to be the larger group, the onboarding people, everybody else who was going to be involved. And if they couldn't pull it together, they were never going to buy anyways. And so what we would end up doing is, and then when it came to closing, the closing demo was actually way easier because everybody was already on board with the main points, and it was usually 2 or 3 sticking points they had to get through. And so ultimately what we realized is you had to have them almost beg for this next demo, because if they didn't beg for that demo, they weren't ready. They just are stuck in passive looking. But when something happened, then they'd move, we could tell them, oh, call us, and they would. So ultimately, these are the 3 reasons why people buy auto books, right? One is basically our executive team is they want to grow deposits. How does the growing deposits and helping small business actually connect? Well, the fact is turns out small businesses, if you look at their deposits before when they used Square and PayPal, it was X. When they actually started using this product, their deposits grew 17X. So they used to have $1,000 in the bank, now they got $17,000 in the bank. Or they got $10,000 in the bank, now they got $170,000 in the bank. So it gave them a way to actually find money to increase their deposits so they could do more loans. Turns out that's the number one reason why people would buy us. Most of them tried to do it because of this job too. That's how they started, but they realized they had most value if they could increase the deposits. And then they actually could assure that they were going to get it done, right? And so the way it would work is we have these 3 jobs, and we'd have a bank prospect come in. There'd be an initial interview talking to them of where they are in their timeline and what they're trying to solve. We'd figure out which job they're really in. We'd pass it to a salesperson, and their job was to actually walk them through the buying process to help them buy. Now, you can imagine that this is where salespeople feel limited, but what happened is salespeople felt more empowered to do more, right? And so out of this, what happened, I'm just going to jump ahead, is this is results. 3x on lead conversions, half the time to close. Though they're doing 3 times the number of demos, the urgency was picked up by them to basically close faster, right? The bonus part was that the implementation, when they actually redesigned those demos to include the larger group, it actually saved them almost 4 months of implementation time because they didn't have to educate everybody along the way. 6x in bank partners, 9x in small business, 5x in revenue growth. Just by understanding that little insight of where are people, what are they trying to learn and where are they coming from. This is about meeting them where they're at. And so so we're doing some research for InterSystems now to say what causes somebody to, what happens to somebody to say today's the day that I need InterSystems. And when they do it, what is the outcome they're seeking, not what's the solution they're seeking. And so it's literally trying to do this A-B thing, is trying to understand that, and from that we're going to get insights like that. Last. So 3 tips. 1, find the struggling moments. They're everywhere. This is a gift and a curse. Once you see them, you can't unsee them, and you see them everywhere. It's like again, I've worked on so many, I probably have 150 products myself that I've built because I can see struggling moments everywhere, right? And what I would tell you is that, like, my favorite is this one down here. Shampoo, right? Hotel. How's that a struggling moment? Well, I wear contacts and I wear glasses, and in the shower I have neither. So I have no idea which one is which. And so half the time I'm putting conditioner in my head or I'm putting body wash on my hair because I can't even read which one is which. And so now I have a strategy to separate them all. And now they're on the wall, I have no idea how to figure it all out. Still struggling with it. Think progress, not product or service. Think about the progress your customer is trying to make at the higher level. My belief is you get involved a lot at the very, very technical level, but ultimately, what is the business reason why they're hiring you? And to make sure that that's at the center of how you're thinking about it, because it will help you with the trade-offs. And the last thing is, I'll tell you this, is that you can't be good at everything. And for every product I've done, I always make people start to declare what are they going to suck at. And so, like, for example, my favorite example of this is Southwest Airlines. They suck at snacks. They are just the worst, right? But nobody's not going to fly Southwest because the snacks suck. And you can give them all the suggestions at the end of the day to make them better, and they're just going to let you say, bring your own snacks, man. Right? We want to make sure we have the lowest cost. We want to basically get you in and out as fast as possible. We're doing, that's just not something that you're looking for. And the interesting part is when you look at Southwest, it doesn't compete with other airlines. If you look at the people who fly Southwest, it competes with driving or not going at all. Right? So I'll end it with this. Clay basically, again, I had these wonderful sessions with Clay, and Clay would always end so he'd ask me these crazy questions. So one of them was, what's your greatest innovation ever? And my arrogant fast answer was, my next one, of course. He goes, no. I'm going to give you some context. So Clay was Mormon, and he would always say, you're dead, you're on the pearly gates, there's a list St. Peter has of all the things you've done in your life. Which one's going to get you into heaven? I'm like, holy shit, I don't know about that one. So I had to go off and think about it. And as I went through it, I looked at it, and I realized, okay, the Patriot Missile Guidance System, I'm pretty sure that's going to send me to hell. That's not going to send me to heaven, right? And as good as Pokemon mac and cheese is, it's still probably not going to send me. And I thought harder and harder about it. And then it hit me. So when I was I worked with Dr. Deming for about 6 years. And when I was 22, we were in Des Moines, Iowa. And we were at a supplier looking at a line, and we're trying to run back. And all of a sudden, I had this moment where I panicked as we're late for the plane, and the car was empty. And back in those days, you had to fill the car up. And so I panicked when I pull into the gas station, right? This is 1987, right? And what am I panicked about? Which side is the filler cap on? You're looking in the mirrors, you're looking in this side. You can't figure it out. You pull up on the wrong, you're looking both sides. You pull it up on one side, wrong side. And eventually you just pull it over and go screw it, we're just going to fill it up, right? And in the meantime, Deming, who's 85 at this time, and he's just screaming at the front, this is a problem. We need to solve this problem. You need to do something. I'm like, dude, let's just get to the airport, man. I just want a beer. And ultimately the fact is he went to my boss and said, he didn't really know my name, so the way he called me the kid, and he'd say, we need to get the kid to work on the gas tank problem. And I'm like, no, we don't. No, we don't. And so eventually I got assigned this project to work. This is the Ford Taurus gas gauge in 1987. And this is the embarrassing part. By 1992, I had to add this little arrow to tell you which side the filler cap is on. I don't make any money on it. It's literally ubiquitous to every car company. Even the electric car companies are telling you which sides to charge unless they have a charger on both sides. But the reality is that little thing has helped people figure out, kind of like not have to remember where the gas filler cap is. And I'll say that's the one thing that's going to get me into heaven. If you want to a podcast, it's called the Circuit Breaker. There's a bunch of this kind of thinking around it for you to think about and how to really go through it. And then I have a couple of books, Demand Side Sales, Learning to Build, and Job Moves are just some books that I wrote. Or I wrote with other people, of course, because as a dyslexic, you can't really write a book. So there are a lot of my ideas, let's put it that way. Questions, comments? Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question.
You even mentioned it in at one point that it was about customer outcome.
Yep. So what's interesting is it started with when I was in Japan. They started to beat me up because as an engineer, all I was ever given was problem sets. And they kept telling me, don't worry about the problems, worry about the function of things, right? And so I end up coming back, so I had to come back from Japan and teach engineers a new way to think about it. And so I started by saying, well, what's the job of the system, right? And then I realized, what's the job the customer's trying to get done? And so it basically flipped from being a supply side concept over to the demand side concept. And to be honest, it helped me, because most people give me big, thick marketing research reports that I couldn't read. And if I could sit down with 10 customers, very quickly I could figure out kind of what was happening and what to do. And then over the last 20 years, I've turned it into a method to share with other people. But it's mostly because it starts with what's the function, emotionally, socially, and functionally, what are you trying to do? What's the consumer trying to do? And it's their responsibility, not yours. That's the other part. You're just part of the solution. I always say, 90% of the time, you're the mustard on the sandwich, you're not the sandwich. And we all think we're the sandwich, right? But when you start to realize you're the mustard, what makes that sandwich that much better? So that's why I call it that. Yep.
Give an example to a struggle moment where you identified and you could not unsee it. Because I assume many of us see things, but we are also used to ignoring things.
Yeah, so the question was, can we give me an example of where you saw a struggling moment and then you can't unsee it, but the fact is we haven't really developed anything for it yet. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So I did a lot of work in gum, chewing gum. And one of the things we realized is that, it came up through these kind of interviews of struggling moments, is how people use gum to prevent them from eating. And so we built a whole line of gum that basically, so for example, think of it as I'm gonna put a piece of gum that actually makes your orange juice taste terrible. So you'll eat peppermint gum, but when you put peppermint with orange juice, it's horrible. And so we figured out all these different flavors to actually help people kind of use it as a diet supplement, right? Or as a way to assist them with willpower along the way, because they're chewing, they're salivating, it will get rid of the hunger, that kind of stuff. We launched something in it would have been like 2007. And they kept it on the shelf till 2008, but it did not grow fast enough. And that problem still exists today, and nobody's going after it. I see it every single day. Every time I watch people chew gum, you start to, so one of the things another thing we found in that study was basically how angry people were in the car, and that they used gum to calm themselves down. And so we built this biggie bottle that basically fit in the cup holder and had little chiclets kind of in it, and then a place to store it. It doubled their sales, right? So we had these different ideas, and they went with that one and got bigger that one, but this one on the side, it's still there. It's literally almost, 15, 17 years later, it still exists. The other one I did was, I did McDonald McFlurry line. I did all of that. I modified their milkshake thing into a smoothie yogurt machine for the morning in 1996. And we had a 15-year non-compete, and 17 years later, they came out with the McFlurry line, which now they're the biggest providers of smoothies in the world. So sometimes it's a little early, but the other part is that we have to realize that customers have to be ready. Think about Surrey, right? How long has Surrey been around? 2010. It took us almost 10 years to figure out how to use it. And that's not technology's problem, that's actually a human behavior problem. And so that's why sometimes you get insights that are ahead of kind of where it's going to happen. But this is just paying attention to the causation of what causes people to change their behavior. Yep. Anything else? Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And this is what I do every day now because I love to share and love to develop product. And I appreciate you just being here. So thank you.